They thought framing a black teen would be easy, that no one powerful would ever notice. They forgot one thing. Her brother had the power to flip the entire courtroom upside down. Ariel Porter never thought a quick stop at a strip mall in Tempe, Arizona, would put her entire future at risk. At 17, she had her eyes set on UCLA, already accepted into their pre-law program. Her teachers praised her. Her track coach called her unstoppable. And her parents, both school teachers, couldn't have been prouder. That Saturday afternoon was supposed to be simple. Ariel needed a new backpack. Finals were 2 weeks away, and her old one had finally given out. She headed to a place called Discount City, not the fanciest spot, but close and cheap. She remembered her mom's words that morning, half joking. Don't spend a fortune. Ari, inside. The store was busy, loud kids running between aisles, a cashier shouting for a price check. Ariel found a backpack pretty quickly, a plain navy blue one. While she waited in line, she pulled out her phone, scrolling through her texts. That's when it happened. A man in a red polo shirt, who she would later learn was the store manager, tapped her on the shoulder. He said she needed to follow him to the back room. Confused, Ariel asked why. He said someone had reported her for slipping merchandise into her bag. Ariel stared at him, stunned. She hadn't even touched anything else in the store. They walked past staring customers. Ariel could feel their eyes sticking to her, labeling her before she even had a chance to speak. In the cramped back office, the manager told her to empty her pockets and backpack. She did, hands trembling. The only things that spilled out were her phone, wallet, lip balm, and the backpack she was about to buy, still with the security tag on it. He looked disappointed, like he wanted her to be guilty. Still, he said he had no choice but to call the police, claiming it was company policy. Ariel tried to argue she hadn't done anything, but he wouldn't listen. The police officer who arrived was polite at first. He even apologized to Ariel while he handcuffed her, explaining he had to follow procedure. She sat in the back of the cruiser, feeling like she was watching someone else's life. This wasn't supposed to happen to kids like her kids who did everything right. Down at the precinct, they booked her for petty theft. Ariel kept saying it was a mistake, but nobody really seemed to care. They handed her a court date and sent her home hours later, her wrists still burning from the cuffs. That night, she cried into her pillow, trying to be quiet so her parents wouldn't hear. She couldn't stop thinking about her college dreams slipping away because of one ugly misunderstanding. The court date came faster than she expected. Her parents hired a small local attorney who barely seemed to listen to her story. He told her these things usually get sorted out, just stay polite, stay calm. Walking into the Maricopa County Courthouse, Ariel tried to hold her head high, tried not to let fear swallow her. She wore her best church dress, clutched her folder of spotless report cards and character references like a shield. She didn't know yet that none of it would matter. At the front of the courtroom sat Judge Constance Weller, a woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper stare. As soon as Ariel's name was called, she felt the temperature in the room drop. The judge barely looked at her when she entered her plea of not guilty. Instead, Judge Weller leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the arrest report with something between boredom and irritation. She asked no questions. She didn't request the store footage that Ariel's attorney had mentioned existed footage that would have cleared her. Instead, she quickly announced that the evidence supported probable cause for a felony charge and scheduled a preliminary hearing for 2 weeks later. Felony. The word kept ringing in Ariel's ears like an alarm she couldn't turn off. Her whole life, her scholarships, her reputation, everything she'd worked for balanced on the edge of a lie. She wanted to scream, wanted to demand that someone, anyone, actually listen to her, but she knew better. She sat down quietly, tears prickling behind her eyes, thinking hard about who she could call someone powerful enough to make a difference, someone who actually believed her. And she thought of her brother, but Ariel knew calling Roman wasn't a small step. It meant throwing a grenade into a courtroom that already wanted her to disappear. The next hearing came faster than Ariel could process. 2 weeks blurred into a fog of restless nights and endless worry. She barely touched her food, barely spoke to her parents, afraid every conversation would slip into panic. When the morning finally came, Ariel sat in the back seat of her dad's car, staring out the window as they drove to the Maricopa County Courthouse. Her mother kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, whispering prayers under her breath. Ariel held on to her brother Roman's words from the night before. Stay calm. I'm watching everything from DC. If it gets bad, I'll step in. But Ariel had no idea how bad it was about to get. Inside courtroom 2B, she sat stiffly beside her lawyer, Mr. Halverson, a man who reminded her of a tired substitute teacher. He had promised he'd request the store footage today, that he'd present her character letters, that he'd fight for her. Judge Weller entered, black robe swirling behind her. She didn't smile, barely glanced around the room, just called the docket in a clipped voice, moving cases like check marks on a list. Ariel Porter, case number 5739. Ariel stood, her knees wobbling. Mr. Halverson cleared his throat. Your Honor. The defense requests to submit video footage from Discount City showing that Miss Porter did not commit any theft and to move for immediate dismissal of charges. Judge Weller didn't even let him finish. She cut in sharply. The motion is denied. This court finds sufficient cause based on the police report. We will proceed to trial. Ariel's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked at Mr. Halverson, expecting him to object, to say something, anything, but he just mumbled, noted, and sat down. Ariel tried to speak, tried to stand up for herself, but the judge banged her gavel once, hard. This is not a discussion. Miss Porter. Her parents sat frozen behind her, her mother's hand clamped over her mouth, her father's fists balled tight against his knees. Judge Weller then turned to the prosecutor, a young woman with a smug little smile. Do you wish to amend the charges? Yes, Your Honor, the prosecutor said, flipping a page in her folder. Based on new information, the state is elevating to felony grand theft. Gasps rose from the back of the room. Ariel's lawyer jolted upright. Grand theft. That's absurd. The value of the merchandise enough. Judge Weller barked. We'll let a jury decide. Ariel stood there, her mouth dry, her mind reeling. She felt herself sinking under the weight of the courtroom's indifference. It didn't matter that she was innocent. It didn't matter that the store manager had no real proof. To them, she was already guilty. Judge Weller ordered her to return in 3 weeks for the pretrial conference. Cash bail was set at $5,000. Ariel's parents could barely afford it. She watched her father bury his face in his hands while her mother frantically whispered about loans and savings accounts. Judge Weller didn't blink. She was already moving on to the next case. Walking out of the courtroom, Ariel felt smaller than she ever had in her life. In the hallway, Mr. Halverson muttered some nonsense about filing an appeal and working something out. But Ariel wasn't listening anymore. Her brother's voice echoed in her mind again. If it gets bad, I'll step in. It was bad. It was worse than bad. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and sent a single text. Roman, it's happening. I need you. She didn't even have time to sit before her phone lit up with his reply. Stay there. Don't sign anything. I'm making some calls. She slid the phone back into her purse and leaned against the cold wall, feeling the courthouse press down on her from all sides. All around her, strangers walked by like nothing had happened. Lawyers laughed with each other. Clutching coffee cups, security guards talked about weekend plans. Nobody saw her. Nobody cared. But one person did, and he had the power to make them all listen. Ariel didn't realize yet that when Roman moved, the ground would start to shift under everyone's feet. Roman Porter wasn't the kind of man who needed to threaten anyone. His name carried enough weight on its own. By the time Ariel texted him from the courthouse bench, Roman was already pacing his office in Washington. Tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, face set like stone. His sister's message wasn't a plea, it was a flare shot into the sky. And Roman knew he had no choice but to respond immediately. He didn't bother with secretaries or scheduling assistants. Roman grabbed his personal phone and called his oldest friend in Phoenix. Assistant U, Attorney Caleb Rock, who answered on the second ring. Caleb, I need you in Tempe right now. There's a judge down there railroading my sister. I want eyes on her courtroom before the hour's out. Caleb, sharp and loyal, didn't ask questions. I'm on it. Roman didn't hang up yet. And Caleb, find me everything you can on Judge Constance Weller, every decision, every sanction, every complaint that got buried. When Roman ended the call, he stared out his window at the Capitol dome. He knew this wouldn't just be a simple case of getting Ariel released. If what she said was true, and he had no doubt it was something much uglier was happening in that courthouse. Meanwhile, back in Tempe, Ariel sat beside her parents in the courthouse cafeteria. They hadn't touched their food. Her mom clutched a plastic cup of water like it might shatter if she moved wrong. Ariel's dad spoke first, voice low and broken. We'll get through this. I'll call in favors. Before he could finish, Ariel's phone buzzed again. Roman, is the judge still there? She quickly typed back, yes. Hearing a different case now. Roman didn't waste time. Stay put. Tell your lawyer to do nothing without calling me first. I'm sending someone in. Ariel showed the message to Mr. Halverson, who frowned but nodded stiffly. Whatever he thought about taking orders from the U.S. Attorney General, he didn't dare argue. 20 minutes later, a tall man in a navy suit walked into the cafeteria, sharp haircut. Serious eyes. He scanned the room once, spotted Ariel, and walked straight over. Miss Porter, he said, his voice steady. Professional? Yes. He flashed a badge so quickly it barely registered. Caleb Rock. Roman sent me. Relief flooded Ariel's chest so fast it nearly knocked her breath out. Caleb sat down without waiting for an invitation. Tell me exactly what happened. No skipping details. Ariel launched into it, the backpack. the false accusation,
the arrest.
Judge Weller's refusal to review the footage. Her parents added bits and pieces, their voices thick with anger and fear. When Ariel finished, Caleb leaned back and tapped his pen against his notepad.
All right, here's what's happening.
Roman's pulling Judge Weller's record as we speak. Meanwhile, I'm going to file an emergency motion to demand the surveillance footage be submitted before trial.
That'll buy us some time.
Ariel swallowed hard.
What if it doesn't work?
Caleb gave her a look that was somehow both gentle and fierce.
It'll work.
We're not leaving you out here alone. Ariel had spent days feeling invisible.
But sitting there,
watching Caleb mobilize on her behalf, she felt something spark inside her, a stubborn little fire refusing to die out. While they spoke, Caleb's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smiled thinly.
Roman's faster than I thought.
Judge Weller's got history. What kind of history? Ariel's mom asked. Caleb stood up, buttoning his jacket. The kind that's going to make headlines. He told them to stay nearby and promised to be back soon. As he disappeared down the hall, Ariel sat back in her chair, heart hammering.
Maybe, just maybe,
the system didn't have all the power after all. But part of her knew that people like Judge Weller didn't give up quietly. Ariel couldn't imagine how far Judge Weller was willing to go to keep her secrets buried. Roman didn't just find dirt on Judge Weller, he found an entire garden. Within an hour, his staff had pulled up 3 prior complaints from minority defendants who alleged that Weller refused to admit crucial evidence or issued harsher sentences without justification. None of the cases had ever made it past the complaint stage, buried under mountains of legal technicalities.
Roman stared at the files,
anger simmering behind his calm exterior. Patterns this blatant weren't accidents, they were choices. Back in Tempe,
Caleb Rock moved just as fast.
Armed with the emergency motion, he marched into the clerk's office and demanded an expedited hearing.
At first, the clerk,
a woman named Denise who wore worry like a second skin,
hesitated.
Judges didn't like surprises, especially not ones that threatened to drag their old decisions into the light.
But Caleb wasn't asking.
He leaned in close and spoke low enough that only Denise could hear.
This isn't just a case anymore, it's national.
If you stall,
you're part of it.
She swallowed hard,
nodded,
and disappeared behind a set of heavy oak doors.
10 minutes later, Ariel, her parents, and Mr.
Halverson were called into an impromptu hearing. Judge Weller sat high behind her bench, lips pursed tight like she smelled something she didn't like. Caleb walked in, sharp and fearless. He didn't bow or stammer, he didn't even smile.
Your Honor.
The defense respectfully requests a court order to immediately obtain and review the Discount City surveillance footage from the date of Miss Porter's alleged offense. Judge Weller narrowed her eyes.
You're not her attorney of record.
I'm here on behalf of the U. Attorney General's office,
Caleb said smoothly. Roman Porter.
The judge stiffened, just the name shifted the air in the room.
Weller adjusted her robe.
Buying time. The motion is denied. The court already ruled on the relevance of that footage. Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. Then the defense moves to enter into evidence records of past complaints against this court regarding selective enforcement and suppression of exculpatory evidence.
Your Honor.
The room fell dead silent. Even the court reporters stopped typing for half a second. Judge Weller's face turned a dangerous shade of red. This is highly irregular.
And yet, Caleb said,
voice like steel. Here we are. Ariel couldn't breathe. She gripped the edge of the bench so hard her fingers ached. Judge Weller slammed her gavel once. Motion under review. Court is adjourned until further notice. She stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled over and disappeared into her chambers without another word. Outside, Ariel turned to Caleb,
whispering, "Is that it?
Did we win?"
Caleb shook his head.
Not yet. But we've got her scared. He pulled out his phone and dialed Roman immediately.
She's rattled. I say we hit now.
Before she regroups,
Roman didn't hesitate. I'm coming there myself.
2 hours later, a black SUV pulled up outside the courthouse.
Roman Porter stepped out,
dressed not in a tailored Washington suit, but in jeans and a leather jacket, like a man ready for a street fight. The courthouse buzzed, staffers whispering, attorneys craning their necks. Roman didn't stop to greet anyone. He walked straight up the marble steps and into the heart of the building like he owned it. Inside, Judge Weller had locked herself in her chambers, supposedly reviewing motions. Roman didn't care. He pulled the clerk aside. This is no longer a state matter, it's federal now. He handed Denise a sealed letter signed by the Deputy Attorney General, announcing a full federal investigation into courtroom practices under Judge Weller's tenure. By the end of the afternoon, the Department of Justice's Internal Affairs Division had started combing through every case Weller had touched in the last 5 years. Ariel stood in the hallway,
stunned,
as news reporters began arriving, cameras flashing, microphones extending toward anyone who would speak. Roman finally approached her, voice low so only she could hear. You did the right thing.
Ari, you called when it mattered.
She blinked hard to keep from crying. But what happens now? Roman gave a half smile. the kind that didn't reach his tired eyes.
Now, he said,
We show them they can't bury people like you anymore. But Roman knew this wasn't just about saving Ariel's future. It was about exposing everything Judge Weller had built her career trying to hide. The next morning, the courthouse didn't look the same. News vans lined the street, reporters swarmed the sidewalk, shoving microphones at anyone who looked like they might know something. Court clerks slipped through side doors. Prosecutors shielded their faces. Even the bailiffs looked jumpy, their hands hovering near their radios.
inside,
Judge Weller called for an emergency hearing, trying to regain control before the storm hit full force. She sat taller in her chair now, voice sharpened to a blade, but the crowd wasn't hers anymore. Roman Porter stood in the gallery, arms crossed, face unreadable. Caleb sat beside Ariel and her family at the defense table, a file thick with damning evidence in his hands. When Judge Weller entered, she barely glanced at Roman, pretending he wasn't there. She cleared her throat. This court will proceed with the preliminary hearing in case 5739.
the state of Arizona versus
Ariel Porter.
she said stiffly.
But before she could continue,
Caleb rose to his feet. Your Honor.
the defense moves for immediate dismissal based on newly uncovered evidence of systemic judicial misconduct. We have 32 filed complaints
Sealed settlements.
and a direct pattern of constitutional violations under your courtroom. The judge's face twitched just slightly.
This is irrelevant to the case at hand. She snapped.
Roman stepped forward then, breaking every rule of courtroom procedure. His voice filled the chamber without him even raising it. Avec tout le respect que votre honorabilité mérite.
Quand l'intégrité d'un juge est en question,
Rien d'autre ne peut procéder. Reporters scribbled frantically, some even murmured into mics. Judge Weller gripped her gavel but didn't strike it. She knew any move she made now would only feed the fire.
the prosecutor, looking like she wanted to disappear,
Mumbled something about needing time to review the defense's filings.
Caleb pressed, there's nothing to review. It's over.
A heavy silence blanketed the room.
Finally,
Judge Weller exhaled through her nose.
a long, slow hiss.
Charges dismissed without prejudice,
She muttered.
almost choking on the words. The courtroom erupted, not with cheers, but with the buzz of stunned conversations. People leaned toward each other, whispering furiously. Ariel could hardly believe it. It felt like someone had lifted a 100-pound weight off her chest. She turned to Roman, who just gave her a tiny nod, no celebration. Just acknowledgement. Outside the courthouse, the real battle began. Roman stepped in front of the cameras, speaking directly to the nation. My sister's story isn't unique. It's the story of every young person who's been silenced, overlooked, or railroaded by a system that was supposed to protect them. We're not stopping with one case.
We're cleaning house.
He announced a full federal probe into judicial misconduct across Maricopa County, a bombshell that sent political shockwaves through Arizona overnight. By noon, Judge Weller's name was trending nationwide. Reporters dug up everything questionable donations, shady real estate deals, suspicious partnerships with private prison contractors. The woman who once sat above others in judgment now found herself drowning in it. Ariel stayed mostly quiet through it all. She didn't want the spotlight, didn't crave revenge. She just wanted her life back.
Still.
When she walked out of the courthouse that day, head held high, something inside her had changed forever.
She wasn't just a kid anymore.
Roman squeezed her shoulder as they reached the parking lot.
You did good, kid.
Ariel smiled weakly.
I didn't really do anything.
You stood up.
Roman said, sometimes that's the hardest thing there is.
That night,
Back at home,
Ariel lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, she let herself believe that the future she dreamed of was still possible. She wasn't naive anymore. She knew the system was broken, knew it wouldn't be fixed overnight. But she also knew something else, something Judge Weller had tried so hard to make her forget. Her voice mattered. Her life mattered.
et elle n'allait pas laisser quiconque prenne ça d'elle à nouveau.
The fallout from Judge Weller's collapse was just beginning to ripple outward, shaking the village to its core. The next few weeks were chaos. Judge Constance Weller resigned under pressure just 9 days after Ariel's charges were dropped. She didn't go down quietly. At her resignation press conference, she claimed she was the victim of political persecution and hinted at conspiracies she couldn't prove. But nobody bought it. The evidence Caleb and Roman had uncovered was too solid, too ugly to ignore. Over 30 cases Weller had overseen were reopened. 10 defendants who had taken plea deals they didn't fully understand were released. 2 others had already served time for crimes they likely hadn't committed. The Department of Justice sent investigators crawling through courtrooms all across Maricopa County. What they found wasn't just about one bad judge, it was a system built on speed and silence, where young Black and Latino defendants got rushed through the machine while others walked away with slaps on the wrist. Local news stations ran nightly nightly segments about the scandal. Families came forward with stories that mirrored Ariel's wrongful charges.
Ignored evidence.
Public defenders who barely knew their names. The mayor of Tempe issued a public apology. The governor promised sweeping judicial reforms. New training programs were ordered. Old policies were shredded. And everywhere Ariel went, the grocery store,
The library.
the park, strangers would stop her.
Thank her. Hug her.
Some just stood there with tears in their eyes.
Unable to find the words.
At first,
Ariel didn't know what to say.
she wasn't used to being seen, wasn't used to being the symbol of anything.
But little by little,
She realized she didn't have to be perfect, she just had to be honest. She started speaking at schools, first in Tempe,
then in surrounding cities,
She told kids about what happened not to scare them, but to warn them,
to remind them that knowing your rights, using your voice,
and refusing to be invisible mattered more than anyone ever told them.
she didn't sugarcoat it.
She told them how fast everything could fall apart, how easily someone's mistake or bias could wreck your future. But she also told them how one voice could make the ground shake. Roman stayed in Arizona a few weeks longer than he intended. He quietly set up a foundation to help students facing court battles get real legal help, no fanfare.
No press releases.
Just action.
At home,
Life slowly stitched itself back together. Ariel's parents stopped flinching every time the phone rang.
they started laughing again.
Her mother took up painting. Her father bought a secondhand guitar and taught himself how to play.
And Ariel,
She got her UCLA acceptance letter reconfirmed, along with a new scholarship that listed her activism as part of her qualifications. When she boarded the plane for Los Angeles that fall, she carried only 2 bags, one with her clothes, the other with every letter,
note,
and cards she'd received from people who said her story gave them hope. She sat by the window, staring out at the clouds, feeling a kind of peace she hadn't known in months, not because everything was fixed,
not because justice had magically appeared,
but because she had survived it. She had stood her ground when every force around her tried to shove her under.
and she wasn't done yet.
Roman called just before her plane took off.
She answered, smiling. You proud of me?
She teased. Roman chuckled.
Kid, you're just getting started.
She laughed and promised to call when she landed. As she hung up, the flight attendant gave final instructions, and the engines rumbled to life. Ariel closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deep, and let herself believe that the next chapter would be hers to write. No judge,
No system.
no mistake defining her story. But before Ariel could move forward completely, there was still one last conversation she needed to have, one that would stay with her forever. 2 days before classes started at UCLA, Ariel found herself sitting on a bench overlooking Santa Monica Beach. The sun was dropping low, painting the sky in messy streaks of orange and purple. Families laughed nearby. Surfers dragged boards across the sand, and vendors called out, selling ice cream and souvenirs.
It should have been perfect. It almost was.
But Ariel felt something tugging at her, a piece of unfinished business. She dialed a number she hadn't called since the day the charges were dropped. To her surprise, Judge Weller answered,
There was a pause.
long and stiff, as if neither of them knew who should speak first.
Finally,
Ariel broke the silence. I don't know why you did what you did.
maybe you thought you were protecting something.
Maybe you just didn't see me at all. The judge said nothing.
Just listened.
Ariel's voice stayed steady.
I'm not calling to curse you out.
I'm not calling to forgive you either. I'm calling to tell you.
You lost.
Another long pause. Then Weller spoke, her voice rough like gravel.
You don't understand how things work.
Ariel almost laughed, but there was no humor in it.
I understand enough.
I understand that when people stay quiet, the wrong things keep happening.
Weller sighed into the phone.
A sound that somehow carried both defeat and stubbornness. The world's not fair.
Girl, it never was.
Ariel stood up from the bench, tucking the phone tighter against her ear as she walked toward the water. Maybe not,
She said softly.
but I'm not going to live in the one you tried to trap me in. She didn't wait for a reply. She hung up and slipped the phone into her pocket, the ocean breeze whipping her hair across her face. That conversation stayed with her not because of what was said,
But because of what it meant,
Some people would never change. Some systems would fight like hell to stay broken. But change didn't need permission. It didn't need an invitation. It needed people willing to be loud, willing to be stubborn, willing to be seen. Even when the world wanted to look the other way, Ariel smiled as she kicked off her shoes and let the cold water lap against her feet. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every kid who'd ever been doubted, every parent who'd ever prayed for a break, every voice that had been silenced and dared to speak anyway. She wasn't naive enough to think her fight was over. She knew it was just beginning. But standing there,
barefoot in the Pacific, she also knew this. She wasn't alone. Not anymore.
and neither was anyone else willing to stand up. If you found Ariel's story powerful, if it made you think about the silent battles happening all around us, don't stay quiet.
Share this story.
Speak up when you see injustice. Be the voice someone else might need to hear.
Et si vous voulez plus de vraies histoires humaines qui comptent,
Abonnez-vous et restez avec nous. Parce que parfois, la seule chose plus forte que la peur est la vérité.